Welcome to the first European Integral Conference, and thank you very much, Ben Scanty, and all the people who worked so hard to make this conference possible for us all. And thank you for the opportunity of being with you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm delighted to have this opportunity of speaking with you. It's wonderful that so many people have come from so many different parts of the world and from so many disciplines to explore this amazing integral vision. I want to thank you all for being here, but I also of course want to thank Ken Wilber and the other people who've done so much to give birth to this integral vision, to apply it in so many areas of the world, and to make it possible for us to explore its future during this conference. What I'd like to do today is to cover three areas. The first is the question of how we can optimize the impact of integral ideas, how we can optimize our impact in the world. The second is to explore what are the key ideas for us to get out there. And the third thing is to look at how we can apply the integral vision to help and heal our troubled world. So the first question, how can we optimize the impact of integral ideas in the world? Well, of course, there are many different ways, but I want to emphasize two things that are really going to be crucial. The first is that we do really high quality work. And the second is that we become what we might call gnostic intermediaries. So the need for high quality work becomes because we are trying to bring new ideas, a new vision, a new perspective into the mainstream. And in order to do that, we need to be very effective and skilled in our own disciplines, whatever they are, whether you're a psychologist or a philosopher or someone working out in the field, whatever it is. If we're going to impact the mainstream, we have to be really competent in the areas in which we're trying to work. So we're called to master a couple of different things. We're called to master not only integral ideas and theory, but also to master our own particular discipline and field so that we can bring them together. So to do that, we need to do really high quality work. We need to do careful, rigorous thinking. We need to do careful, rigorous experiments to test the ideas and applications. We also need to publish our work, get it out in the world into mainstream outlets. So that's one thing. We really need to do work at a very high standard, whether it's intellectual or practical or whatever way it is. The second thing is that we're called to be gnostic intermediaries. Now, a gnostic intermediary is a term that was coined by Carl Jung. He used it to describe Wilhelm, the translator of the I Ching. And he said that Wilhelm had imbibed the I Ching so deeply into his own being that he was able to transmit its wisdom to the world out of his own direct experience. So we are called to be gnostic intermediaries because what we're trying to do is in part bring contemporary, modern and postmodern and integral ideas into the mainstream, but we're also trying to bring contemplative wisdom into the mainstream. So we're not just trying to communicate ideas, we're trying to communicate and transmit a certain kind of wisdom, because integral draws so deeply on the contemplative traditions, on the perennial wisdom of the world's great philosophies and religions and spiritual traditions. And to transmit that requires that we become Gnostic intermediaries, and to become an effective Gnostic intermediary requires three things. First, it requires that we actually imbibe the wisdom. We can't just take the ideas, we have to actually marinate ourselves in the ideas. We have to open ourselves to the wisdom of these traditions, whether it's Christian contemplation or Buddhist meditation or Hindu or Taoist yogas, whatever it is, we have to do these practices and open ourselves to the wisdom that they embody and that they cultivate and that they unveil within us. And then we have to do something more. So the first step of becoming an effective Gnostic intermediary is to imbibe the wisdom. The second is to master the concepts and language of the community we're trying to cultivate, we're trying to communicate to. So if we're trying to communicate, for example, to psychologists or anthropologists, we need to learn those concepts and conceptual framework. And then the third thing we need to do is we need to be able to translate contemplative wisdom into the concepts and language of the community that we're trying to communicate to, so as to create an aha experience. That is, so that these perennial, profound ideas make sense in the language and concepts of the people we're communicating to. So, two things then that we are uniquely called to in order to be effective communicators of the integral vision. One, to do really high quality work in the mainstream and in integral, and second, to become Gnostic intermediaries. So what are the most valuable ideas for us to get out? What are the integral ideas that would be most effective in the world? And I'd like to suggest you might just take a moment to think for yourself, what do you think are the ideas that are most crucial for us to get out? And particularly, what are the ideas that you are called to communicate? What do you think, what are the ideas that both call you and you are called to get out into the world? It's a really interesting question, kind of a wisdom question for each of us to reflect on. And each of us will have our own list. I want to suggest several that seem particularly crucial to me. One, of course, we all share because it's the reason we're here, and that is that integral ideas are incredibly important, and they're desperately needed at all times, but particularly at this time when we suffer from such an information overload. We're inundated with information, we're drowning in data, and psychologists these days talk about the stress that comes from simply information overload. And part of it is just having more facts than we can process. But a larger part of the issue is not having a framework that is adequate enough, large enough, deep enough to be able to make sense of and hold all this information. And that's where integral comes in, because integral provides us with this framework, or one framework, not the only framework, of course, but an extremely valuable and comprehensive and integrative framework with which to make sense of the enormous flood of information and competing cross currents of ideas in our contemporary culture. So the first idea, which I'm sure we all agree on, that getting the integral vision out into the world, refining it, developing it, communicating it is crucial. Second idea, which I want to suggest is really crucially important and has the potential for real transformative impact, is that adult development is possible. Now, this is not new to any of us in the integral world, but it is new to the vast majority of people in the community and in professional communities, including communities which should know this, like psychologists, psychiatrists. For the most part, there's this implicit assumption in our culture that development pretty much stops around the time the body stops developing. And that is a real tragedy. And the idea that psychological development and spiritual development, of course, can continue beyond the conventional level to post-conventional and even trans-conventional levels has enormous implications. And two of them are particularly important. One of them is that what we call normality is not the ceiling of developmental possibilities. that we can mature beyond what we thought was possible, that there are further levels of developmental maturation that are available to us all. There are capacities and virtues available to us all if we simply cultivate them appropriately. And what we have taken to be normality is looking more and more like an unrecognized collective form of collective developmental arrest. We have been suffering from a case of unrecognized collective developmental arrest. And this has enormous implications for us, for each of us individually, for us as a society, and for our planet as a whole. And it's quite possible that the recognition that we can mature further is going to be absolutely essential to our survival and sanity as a species. Abraham Maslow said it well. He said, what we call normal in psychology is really a psychopathology of the average. But it is so undramatic and so widely spread that we don't even recognize it. So here's the first implication of the idea that we can mature beyond conventional levels. But there's a further one, and that is that many of our contemporary cultural conflicts are expressions of different levels of development. And the conflict over many social and moral issues such as abortion or religious freedom can be seen as conflicts between people at different levels of development. And particularly at the current time, our cultures are being torn by conflict between three major developmental levels. Between a pre-conventional level or a mythic level, between conventional rational people, and people moving into post-conventional stages who are calling the traditional conventions into question. And so many of the conflicts in our world, particularly, for example, conflict with religious fundamentalism, can be seen as expressions of these conflicts, can be seen as expressions of these different developmental levels. But the trouble is, when the different levels aren't recognized, then there's virtually no possibility of resolution and peace between people, because they simply assume that people who disagree with them are either wrong or disturbed or deranged. So this recognition of development has enormous social implications for us. So that's the second idea I'd suggest is really crucial, that we recognize that adult development is possible and the implications it has for our understanding of many social issues. The third idea I'd suggest that is really crucial for us to get out is the idea that contemplative disciplines, spiritual disciplines, can catalyze, can foster this psychological maturation. Of course, not only psychological maturation, but spiritual maturation as well. And this, of course, is one of the claims of contemplative disciplines, that they can foster capacities and virtues that are available to us all, but which remain untapped and undeveloped unless we specifically cultivate them through contemplative practices. So the good news here is that the very qualities of heart and mind, the classic virtues that the world so desperately needs at this time, love, compassion, generosity, wisdom, insight, understanding, these qualities are not only available to us, but we have time-tested technologies for fostering them. And one of the crucial contributions we can make is to unpack, and in our role as Gnostic intermediaries, to make sense of these contemplative practices, whether it's Taoist and Hindu yogas or Christian contemplation or Islamic zikr, whatever the practices. One of the things we can do is to make sense of these, to explain them, to legitimize them, and to demonstrate their benefits so that they become more widespread and so that they cultivate the very qualities that we so desperately need. So those are the first three ideas that I'm suggesting are really crucial to us. That integral ideas are crucial, adult development is possible, the contemplative practices can cultivate. The fourth idea is related to development, and that is that there are two very, very different kinds of religion. Now, as integralists, all of us are aware of the spectrum of development and that there are multiple levels of development that humans can mature through, and that religion is unique in that it of all the great human institutions has expressions at each developmental level. But to simplify things, I want to focus on two, which I would regard as the two most important levels, and those are conventional and transconventional. Now, the tragedy is that our culture really is only aware of conventional religion. And conventional religion centers on a story, a narrative. And the defining feature of conventional level religion is that its prime focus is a story or a narrative which is to be believed. And if you believe it, you're saved, and if you don't, you're damned. So salvation comes through our relationship to, our faith in a particular story. And salvation comes from faith is the central theme of this level of religious expression. Now, in the terms of developmental psychology and the work of James Fowler, who did the work on religious faith, this is the faith of the mythic literal level or the synthetic conventional. And tragically, this is really the only level of religion which our culture and our media recognize. Everything is lumped into that and often dismissed as only that. But what is so crucial for us to recognize, and everyone in the integral community does recognize, but the mainstream culture does not, is that there's a further absolutely crucial form or level of religion, and that is a post-conventional level, or better I think called transconventional level, which centers not on a story, not on a narrative, not on something to be believed, but on a psychotechnology, a set of practices to transform the mind and to cultivate the very qualities and states of consciousness, kinds of insights and realizations that the great religious founders and saints and sages throughout the ages discovered themselves. So this kind of religion, this centers on the contemplative practices. And one of the most crucial ideas we can get out into the culture is that these practices are effective and that they are expressions of a higher or more mature form of religious expression, and that they help us mature to that level of religious expression. And this brings us to the fifth idea, that spiritual disciplines, contemplative practices, are psychotechnologies. This is a radically different understanding of spirituality. It's a recognition that these practices are designed to train the mind. And they're designed to do more than just train the mind. They're designed to train the mind, but also to tame, to transform, and ultimately to transcend the mind, to help us move beyond the mental level into the trans-conceptual, trans-rational, intuitive wisdom, the prajna of Buddhism, the jnana of Hinduism, the marifa of Islam, the gnosis of Christianity, to bring us into a direct intuitive knowing of that trans-rational wisdom which is liberating. And it's that wisdom which radically transforms our understanding of who we are and our way of being in the world, and makes us far more effective instruments of service and contribution in the world. So the goal of these psychotechnologies, these spiritual traditions, is to help us develop for ourselves the very qualities of heart and mind that the great religious founders discovered, and which the great saints and sages have kept alive within each of the traditions. And these practices, these contemplative disciplines, these psychotechnologies, help us to cultivate these qualities and transmit them for ourselves as part of an unbroken chain across centuries and generations. And a crucial thing about this kind of religion, the second kind, this trans-conventional, these contemplative practices, is that they don't require faith. They are practices that we can test for ourselves and see in our own minds, in our own hearts, if they work, and find out for ourselves. What I love about these practices, you don't have to take anything on faith. You can test them for yourselves. So, the sixth idea that I'd like to suggest is crucial, is that these psychotechnologies, these contemplative practices, that the world's spiritual disciplines share common goals and practices. This is the first time in human history we've had all these practices available to us. And it's the first time we can really look at them together and compare and contrast them and do what is called common factors analysis to identify the common themes, the common elements, the common practices. And I've spent a lot of time doing this, and actually spent several years writing a book, Essential Spirituality, the seven essential practices, in which I looked across the world's great religions because I was really intrigued to ask, what is it that the greatest minds in human history, the great sages, the true saints, the most remarkable human beings who've ever lived on this planet, what are the qualities that they say are essential for us to develop in order to live full and effective and contributory lives? And I was really struck that across centuries, across cultures, across traditions, they all seem to agree that 7 qualities of heart and mind were really essential for anyone who wanted to live fully, to live effectively, and to realize their true nature and to understand who and what they really are. And those 7 practices are, first off, to transform motivation, to shift the motives that power us, that move us. The second is to live ethically, to live in a way that is filled with integrity. The third is to develop concentration, the capacity to hold the mind wherever we want it to be. The fourth is to develop emotional maturity. The fifth essential quality is a refinement of awareness. The sixth is wisdom, to cultivate wisdom, deep insight and understanding into ourselves and the world. And the seventh is service, to recognize that we do these practices not just for ourselves alone, because we're not alone, but we do them for the welfare and awakening of everyone. So those 7 practices seem to be universal, at least recommended in each of the major great religions and by the great saints and sages who've laid out paths of transformation and images of human possibility and psychologies of spiritual development and philosophies explaining the nature of us as humans and the world itself. And one aspect of spiritual practice which is very relevant to an integral gathering is that consciousness is catchy. When I was writing the book Essential Spirituality, the 7 Central Practices, I spent 3 years researching the great religions and trying to find out what are the practices that they recommend. And what surprised me most in those 3 years, that as I looked across the world's contemplative practices, as I looked across the advice of the great saints and sages, the most consistent thing they said to cultivate each and every one of these 7 qualities was, if you want to develop these qualities, be with people who have them. And that's one reason why an integral gathering like this is so valuable and so beneficial to us all. So, those are the practices for cultivating the qualities we all want. And that brings us to the question of what we can do to help and heal our troubled world. Because it's no secret that we're at a crucial time in human history, and that the choices our generations make will really decide the fate of our species and our planet. Now, all of you know the problems we're facing: overpopulation, pollution, ecological collapse, weapons of mass destruction. But what's really crucial to recognize is that for the first time in human history, each and every one of the major problems we face, each and every one of our collective crises, is human-caused. And that means that what we call our global problems are actually global symptoms. They're symptoms of our individual and collective psychological and spiritual immaturity and our psychopathologies. And what that means is that we are in a race between consciousness and catastrophe, and that we need to address not just the state of the world, but the state of our minds. And that as integral practitioners, we're called to address not only starvation and overpopulation and ecological disruption, we are called to address the psychological and spiritual immaturities and pathologies within us, and the pathologies and disrupted social institutions and cultures between us. And so we need to address both the outside problems and the inside problems, both the left-hand quadrants and the right-hand quadrants. In short, we need an integral approach. So how do we do this? Well, as always, it comes down to a fundamental question. What can I do? When we look at the world and the problems, it always comes down to what can I do? And even more profoundly, what's the most strategic thing I can do? And in order to answer that question, it's crucial to recognize that this is a wisdom question. There are two kinds of questions. There are knowledge questions and there are wisdom questions. Knowledge questions have a one-time answer. Is it raining? Look outside. No. End of question. But wisdom questions are like koans. They're questions that each time we ask them, they have the potential for taking us deeper into the question, deeper into ourselves, and deeper into reality. So the question, what's the most strategic thing I can do, is a wisdom question. And it's a question we will probably be asking for the rest of our lives. And as integral practitioners, what's crucial for us to recognize is that we're trying to do three things simultaneously. We're trying to relieve the external social and global problems. We're trying to heal their internal sources. And we're trying to bring a more integral perspective or way of looking to bear. And we're really called to be perspectival therapists. We're called to recognize limiting, partial, destructive perspectives, both in ourselves and others. We are called to then recognize and bring to bear more encompassing perspectives, wider and deeper perspectives. And even beyond that, we're called to mature to levels in which all perspectives dissolve into transcendental awareness. And then out of that transcendental awareness, we can allow profound integral perspectives to re-emerge with in their perspectival fullness and their spiritual ground remembered. And in doing this, we're of course called to mature. We have to do our own work on ourselves because mature perspectives require mature people. And so the crucial calling for all of us at this time is to dive into our inner work, our psychological work, our spiritual work as deeply and fully as we can. And that raises the question of how we can work in the world and work on ourselves simultaneously. Unfortunately, there's a practice for that. It's karma yoga, or what I sometimes call spiritual service. And karma yoga is the yoga in which we use our work in the world as our spiritual practice. And it has three crucial elements. The first is that before beginning any major undertaking, any project, we offer it to a higher purpose. We offer it to God or to the service of humanity or our community, something beyond our individual ego. The second is that we do our work as impeccably as possible. And the third, and it's this which makes karma yoga such a razor-edge practice, we simultaneously attempt to let go our attachment to the outcome. And it's those three elements which make karma yoga such a powerful and transformative practice. And doing karma yoga, we go into ourselves to go more effectively out into the world. And we go out into the world in order to go deeper into ourselves. And we keep doing this, we keep repeating this cycle until the boundaries between inner and outer dissolve, and it is all one continuous flow. So, in conclusion, we live in a time of unprecedented challenge. Never before have we had the power to imperil both our species and our planet. But never before have we had the power to heal our species and to bring all people to new levels of prosperity and well-being and maturity. The choices our generation makes will decide whether we leave behind us an evolving civilization and a fertile earth, or a failed species and a plundered planet. Because we have the power to do both. It is our remarkable privilege to be able to realize the integral vision in our own lives, to use it to understand the world, to express it, to help heal the world, and to let it use us in whatever ways will be most helpful. Our world is in very, very deep trouble, but our world is also in good hands, because ultimately it rests in yours. Thank you very much for this chance of being with you. I hope that you have a wonderful conference, and I wish you all the best for you bringing the integral vision into your lives and into the world. Thank you.